we all rise for the universal prayer? O hidden life, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is therefore one with every other. Thank you. You can sit down. Well, first of all, good morning. I hope you have all rested well and that you come here prepared to have your ears and your minds and, most importantly, your hearts open to a very special presentation which we are having this morning. Our two presenters are people who are quite capable to present on their topics, but I think more importantly for us is a certain isolated sort of fact that I'm going to share with you. Our two presenters today are not members of the Theosophical Society, Adyar. Profoundly members of the Theosophical movement, without question accomplished and theosophists by definition of the way that they live their lives and conduct themselves. We've asked them to come to share from sister organizations. First will be Herman Vermeulen, who I am very proud to say that I have had the opportunity to get to know and to work with to some degree over the past couple of years now. First met about 4 years ago now, when the International Theosophical Conferences were being held in California. Herman heads up, he's the leader of the Theosophical Society Point Loma group, which is centered in The Hague in the Netherlands. My first encounter with this group was in California, in a situation where, for whatever reason, the plans for the conference had suddenly changed, and the rooms that had been previously available were no longer available. So thrown into this sort of a condition, somebody had to come to the front and make usable quarters out of some places that had never been used, that were dirty, that were not fit to be used for the conference. The way I came in contact was there was this utterly organized, focused group of people, all of them speaking Dutch, moving here and there, sweeping, cleaning, setting up wires, doing everything that was required to make this a go. And this, as it turns out, was the members who had come from the Point Loma group to this conference, of which Herman was the leader. Herman is a man who has large theosophical experience. He lectures, writes, conducts programs internationally. He's the head of the ISIS Foundation, which is, you don't mind if I look at that, do you? The acronym ISIS stands for International Study Center for the Independent Search for Truth. ISIS is better, I think. So he's the head of that, and he writes for Lucifer magazine, many, many articles. But he's a gentleman that I think is well worth hearing, so I ask you now to lend your ears to his part of this morning's presentation. Herman Vermeulen.
Okay, good. Well, thank you all for the invitation, and especially Mr. International President Tim Boyd and Mr. Vice President Mr. Shita Satapathy, because I think there is quite a challenge in it to invite us. Not so much that we are dangerous, but you force yourself to look a little bit over the fence and see what is going on in the outer world, or in the other parts of the theosophical world. And both Tim and Sitapati know us already from the activities, so they have witnessed it themselves. And I must say I was quite pleased with the invitation. I think it is good to be here. And well, on the other hand, I have to realize that it is an historical moment. Because to my knowledge, from the start on, there was never here a leader of other theosophical organizations to give a presentation. So I'm quite pleased with that. So, and why I'm quite pleased with this is because really deep in our heart we experience that there is a great need for a good and strong theosophical force to the outer world. And outer world, I mean by that the world of our daily living. And if you see all the problems over there, I think there is a really need to become more acquainted with the theosophical teachings. So I think it is a good thing to be here, and I try to see if I can go on to my next slide. Maybe you don't know, but I'm then from the Point Loma Society, and around 1898 our headquarters was moving to Point Loma, that is the San Diego site in California, but now the headquarters is in the Netherlands. So if you look the past, the present and the future, there's quite a challenge in it. What happens in the past, and I have in mind also on theosophical level, cannot be undone. That has happened. The future is not too far away from us, but the future is the karmic consequences from what we are doing now. So now is very important to us. The present task we have is to bring theosophy in a pure and good and clean way to the outer world. So that theosophy can be inspiring for the humanity, for all the problems we have. So today we are building the future together with each of you. Let's see what we think about the title. Compassion, the solemn reason for the existence of the Theosophical Society. It was a theme, this conference, what I like very much, because I think compassion is one of the most important thing, if not the thing in our work. So I have to explain to you what is my view or our view on compassion, and what is the solemn reason for our existence. Why is that? So let's see what is compassion from our point of view. How do we define that? We think that compassion can be defined as the sense of oneness. And if you look in the secret doctrine and you take the first fundamental principle and you read it and you try to understand it, although it is very hard to grasp the real meaning it by all different type of thinking, then you will see that we're speaking there from a type of infinite. Everything is there, everything exists, everything interconnects, so we have nothing to invent, everything is there already. And what is left from there is that how far are we able for ourselves to think a bit around it, and what can we do with it? And special, how can we implement it on a practical way? So from this point of view, I think the first proposition of the secret doctrine is a very, solid base to understand what compassion is. That sense of oneness can be applied at all levels. It is not a matter of, here you have it and then it is fine. No, it exists on all levels. The sense is growing, can be and must be developed to understand much better what the consequences is of that sense. And there is a funny thing in that. The sense of oneness is not, let's say, if you are a very intellectual person and you study theosophy on a very intellectual way, it doesn't mean that you have also a great sense of oneness. Because that can be quite isolated from each other. It can help, but it is not a guarantee that you have a good sense. So what I like to say with this is a growing concept, what we have all for ourselves. And that is something we have to work on all the time. If you go from the sense of oneness, there are a number of consequences from it. There is no we and them. And if you applied it to your daily life, I think it is a challenge. If you run in daily life in a little bit of problems and you have to stand up for that, quite often you have the feeling that there is a separation. And it is very hard for us, or even we are not willing, to have a look in the reason why something happened and why we have to deal with it. But there is also no sympathy nor antipathy. So at the same time, if you have an uprise of one of them, you can conclude for yourself that your sense of oneness is really going down on that moment. So that gives us quite an, how do you say that? Something what we have to exercise, and very simple what we can check in our own thinking. A very simple example is, for instance, if you take two waves in the ocean and one wave is looking to the other and think that he is a different wave, then you see immediately the concept that it is wrong, because they all exist due by the fact that there is an ocean and there are just an event in that ocean. We are just an event in the totality, what you find in the first proposition. Yeah? We are not standing on ourselves. If you go from that highest point of view, the atomic way of thinking as far as it is possible on our level, then you see, if you start to think about in the direction, what does it mean and how are things working together, then you really need the Buddhic quality. Then you need to see the interconnections without any personal flavor in it. Understand how things are running. Then you see that everything is interrelated. Horizontal and vertical. Nobody can live on his own. It is totally impossible. Horizontal, we need all our neighbors for our food, for our living, for you name it. We need them all. And in the vertical line, we need million and million, maybe billions of other beings to have a body what will work and to express ourselves. So you see, for a very simple, let's say, approach, that there is a highly dependencies. And that is what then quite often wordt called in the Mahaya Buddhist direction, but special with Nagarjuna, dependence arise. We are just an effect in the totality. So if you say compassion, it is seeing what do we have to do? How do we have to do something? And then we come more to the intellectual part. So then you are challenging, Buddhi-Manas are not working, what is the next thing? What options do we are? And so on and so on. And then we have to fall back on a simple option what we yesterday put aside because the quality is not what we expected. But okay, it works. That is what I called practical inspiration. But in principle, we need them all three. The atomic oneness, the Buddhic vision, and the Manasic practical inspiration. And bringing all together, serving that sense of oneness, gives the opportunity to do the things we like to do. So what I try to say here is that we do it on the same way as the Nirmanikaras and the Masters doing, only on our level. But that requires a certain condition of our thinking. And yesterday, of course, and the days before, we heard already a number of cool things about compassion. But what we like to emphasize over here is that compassion is really Maha, Karuna, and in combination with Prajna. We need wisdom. Without wisdom, we cannot come up with compassion. Because compassion has also that element in himself, that we really step in the understanding of the other human being we have to deal with. And we have to try to understand what is going on and how we can help each other and work together. What I try to say is that compassion is much more a state of mind. It is not a matter on training or reaching out for a diploma or something like that, but it is a state of mind. And if you have that sense of oneness and you look around, then you will see that from that sense of oneness is coming to responsibility. Because if you realize that you are part of that oneness and you are interacting and interrelating, you cannot step aside for effects. Then you can only do one thing, and is taking up the responsibility. So what I try to say is that it is an attitude what you developed. And if you develop that attitude, it is impossible to be cool or having a cold shoulder, also sometimes calls. Sometimes you have the feeling, okay, it doesn't suit me on this moment. I don't want to do it. But it is not what we like to be. So we have to do. There is one thing, you can only give to another and to the totality what you have developed in yourself. And someone say, okay, if you give a presentation, you have your text, you deliver the text. But it is not the case. You deliver the text, but you deliver your whole attitude, your whole mentality, your whole way of thinking in the same time. So you transmit much more than just words. If you look a little bit in the word responsibility, then we should realize that we European people, we are related quite often to the sources in Latin, that it has today say something to pledge, to promise, and so on. But I think the most important thing is to be realizing that it is an ability to vibrate in harmony. In harmony with using the two things, the Atmic, the Buddhic, and the higher Manas. And then we are able to touch the inner sense of the other beings as well. And then you get a better, let's say, development of the one senses. The one senses. Why we want to have a subtitle that we say compassion is the solemn reason for the existing of the Theosophical Society is because if you really look in the history of the society and all the discussions in the time of Synod and the Mahatma letters, and I will come a little bit later on it, but also if you look where our society is founded and when it started, you will see that for millions of years the source of our society, the lords of masters of wisdom and compassion, was already working for a very long time with mystery schools, sending their messages, doing almost the same what we try to do nowadays. So there is not a matter of a start in 1875, but we have really to look in history, the Manasaputras and all the maybe a little bit difficult stuff to understand. They did it already million years ago. And from that same lords, there was a start again. But what we have to realize is that from that same lords is coming the idea of the sense of oneness, the compassion, but also the very important statement, universal brotherhood. That is not a very fancy, a nice expression, but it is something what stands on a very basic, solid teachings and knowledge. And if you go from the first proposition, you see that the oneness is there. So there is no need to work on getting one. No, we are one, in fact. But we have to come to an active state. And that is what you find in the beginning of our society, that there is a need for an active nucleus of brotherhood. And I'm saying that is not yet a fact. If you look around in the world and all the problems we have, I think there is a lot of work to be done. So there is no need to become one, like Tim already said in one of his presentations. We are one. There is a need of realization that we are one. And it is our illusion, our separateness, that we think it is not a fact. But the fact is there. And if you see what was then the motivation to start the Theosophical Society in 1875, then it is not an absolute start. It is a restart in a certain part of the world to get that idea transmitted to the people and in the hope that they start working accordingly. So Blavatsky is dus a restart in bringing these ideas. It is a type of renaissance. We were losing, or we lost already this information. In the West we didn't know in what stage we are, and she has to reactivate it. So from there, the first objective is the universal brotherhood, and it is a crucial one. The other two are also important, but not that important. That is the one to study, and it is the one that we have to investigate the forces in our nature and to see what we can be in all our probabilities. There is a very, direct statement in the Mahatma letters, where there was a discussion going on with Synod, that he considered to drop the idea of universal brotherhood. I had this morning a nice experience. I'm dressed now in a black trouser and almost a white shirt. And I was walking around in the hotel, and all the boys, what is doing the service, were looking a little bit strange to me. And then I realized that I was dressed exactly the same as they are. So I'm in a service dressing today to you. But the fact here is that Synod was considering to drop that idea of brotherhood, because of course you have to be nice to your neighbors, but to call them brothers is a step too far. Yeah? And then the master KH was quite clear in it, and they say, we never will accept this. And later on, there was another thing, a proposal, that why not focused more on the occult laws, how things works, how you can make bells ringing from the astral, how you can create for yourself another ring, and so on, and so on. And then you find more or less the same, that the masters prefer, let's say, stopped with this society, than make it a society what is only investigating this type of, let's say, physical knowledge on the astral light and see what you can do with it. Yeah? So I think these two things are quite clear, that universal brotherhood is the main thing in our organizations. And how to form such a nucleus, reading, study, theosophical literature is not enough. Meditation is not enough. Blavatsky was doing much more than that. She was reading, studying and meditating, but she was actively reaching out, teaching and inspire other people. So that means for us that all the things we do to understand the theosophical teachings is just, let's say, in the line of bringing it to the other people, not keeping it for ourselves. Sometimes you get the remark that people say, well, you have a social part in theosophy and you have a technical part. But to my opinion, the technical part is a complete underlining, a proof of that sense of oneness. If you study the first proposition, it's very clear, I think. if you study cycles, if you study initiation, if you study, you can name it. Everything what you study is dealing with the oneness. It is not separated from it. In every letter you can say, in every word, you find the underlining that you have to deal with in totality. How to do an initiation is there is not existing higher levels of conscious, or is there is not, let's say, more advanced people that are willing to help us in that. Yeah. So you see, for me, the technical teaching is a need to develop that idea of compassion on a much higher level. Compassion is not for me only an emotional feeling. It depends on your level of development, in your level of study in theosophy, on which level your sense of oneness is and what is integrated in it. The more you know from technical teachings, the more you understand the oneness. Then we come to another important point, is how to support each other to become a useful instrument in the hands of the masters of compassion. If you want to reach out, we have to do that on the best, let's say, possible way, to our best possibilities. What we have developed, bringing on the right way. So, let's explain it a little bit more. What is an instrument in the hands of the masters? I call that a tool to function in line with the masters' works and characteristic, compassion and wisdom. So we have to be there in a certain state of mind, in a certain mentality, to do that on the right way. If you see in the life of HPB, and we heard already examples how far she wants to go in that, we see in the life of HPB number of examples that she was stepping aside personally and was putting all her effort in the help of another one. Being an instrument is something what an instrument is having properties. And I can give you a very simple example. Look, in the case you need a simple wall socket. And you go to the market and you find a different type of wall sockets, and all wall sockets has a little label on it. And one of the wall sockets say, I only like to supply energy to vacuum cleaners. Or another one say, I only like to work when I like to. Or I don't like to work in the morning, but I only like to work in the evening. Should you buy such a socket? No, of course not. It must be always available. It must be always neutral. And that is the same what applies for us. If we want to be an instrument, that means that we should be ready 24/7 to step up and bring theosophy where needed. Maybe very unexpected. Maybe bring theosophy in a way we have never think about it. Yesterday evening I had a very nice presentation about this estate. And I must say, coming here and looking around and see all the work what there has to be done, I was thinking for myself, my God, how do you do that? And after yesterday's presentation, well, I think it will work. I was seeing a logic sense in it, a good approach, and then you see how you have to work for theosophy. It was not a theosophical word directly involved in it. It asked technical knowledge, skill, organization ideas, how to set it up. And that is just be that instrument what is needed. So it can happen when we just run out of the cage. There happens a situation where we have to deliver our knowledge in a neutral, let's say, unselfish way. If you look outside, and I say it already a couple of times, but I think if you take every newspaper every morning, we are in a very, very dynamic time. We are really sitting in Kali Yuga. And we only learned that we only are sitting in the first part of Kali Yuga. So that means that the acceleration are going faster and faster. So if you see in the world, the global greed, the distrust, the aggression, you name it. Misunderstanding of religion, philosophy and science is a very, very important thing. Imagine yourself, if we as theosophists are able to bring out the real meaning of religion, the university of the word religion. Yeah? That religion is not a plural meaning. There don't exist all different type of religions. No, there is one universal idea. Luckily, our Dutch language have two words for it. Religion in the real sense, and what we call godsdienst, in the direction of religion degraded just to serve to a very personal God. So, imagine yourself if you were able to solve this problem. And I was very pleased with the presentation from Sita yesterday about that short overview, what really merged different views to one. So we say we have to support each other based on the definition of compassion. And if we, as theosophical organizations, are coming from compassion, then we must be the first to apply compassion between each other, but also in combination with each other to the outer world. We needed respect, mutual respect. We have to trust each other. We need cross-pollination. It's a nice word we learned in 2014 from Betty Blend. And for Dutch people knowing our language and English, cross-pollination, what is that? And then she explained it and then she said, yes, that is the great word. And since then, it is a common word in our English. We need an impersonality approach. Set aside our personality, but also set aside our personality sense on organization levels. Otherwise we are not in the right sense of oneness. Yeah? Then we get the we and them feeling coming back. And there must be done training. Training to be trained to present theosophy to the outer world. People and organizations are just means, no goals. And that is an important thing to realize what is our place in this. Cross-pollination is very clear. I think all the organizations, theosophical organizations, have their own history. They have their own, let's say, probabilities. They have studied. They did it on a little bit different way. They did it out maybe a little bit different sources. They have another line of teachers and so on. By the fact we are willing to exercise that knowledge to see how do you study the secret doctrine? What is the reason that you use, for instance, a Crosby, that you use a Bassett, you use a Peruker? What helps that in understanding the secret doctrine? That is a type of cross-pollination we really need very much. So that we, in the first place, to understand each other much better, and in the second place, we train ourselves much better to present it to the outer world. In personality. How to share that light of compassion. Yeah. And now there is a thing coming, what is just a proposal, just an idea. And that speaks a little bit how we can try to work to share it in a better way. Because if we have compassion, if we have the sense of oneness, we should work between the organizations in such a way that the working parts together gain knowledge and exchange knowledge, but it has to come back to everyone in his own organization. If it is not working in that way, our sense of oneness is not really the right sense. I try to make it clear on a diagram. I have just drawn 3 organizations on the bottom. In that organization, you have, for instance, a study group on a certain subject. You can name it, religion, science, whatever, yeah? And there is an international study group. So, they get an assignment from the 3 organizations. They grind on it, they discuss, they think about it, they come up with solutions, they come up with questions, and that sends back to the organizations. And in that organizations, the challenge is over there that it is not sticking in one particular group in that organization, but that the group is transmitting it to all the members of that organization. Because if we want to have a strong force, and we all living in the outer world, we all should be trained to address the daily challenges in our theosophical point of view. And if you give it back to the organizations, maybe they come up with some remarks and say, yeah, but this and that and so on. And then you can go back to that group and say, nice, well explained, good examples, but what with this and what with that? And if you do that, then you see that the enhancement, the enrichment, what we'll do, it is really giving profit to all the organizations and to all the members. And there is a very famous expression, and Blavatsky used it in the Kia as well, that if you see that if you have a bundle of sticks, the closer the sticks are, the more that they fix to each other, the stronger the complete bundle is. The farther away the sticks from each other, the weaker the is. So I try to say something here about let's really try to communicate, to exchange between all members from all organizations. And we, of course, you have to organize this. And this is just an idea, a proposal, nothing more than that, something to consider. This idea started already a couple of years ago. In 2008, in, Pennsylvania, Haverford, the International Theosophical Conference group started as an official foundation. A very small one, coming from a long tradition for a couple, I think, 15 years already in that time, that they sitting together, have tea and eating cakes, and speaking a little bit about theosophy, and really intermixed with all traditions. And then the idea starts to grow that we should do it in a little bit more serious level. Not there is something wrong with tea and cake, but more structured. And in that time, there was the ULT, United Lords of Theosophists, our TS, Point Loma group, and the TS Adyar. And we start working. And if you look nowadays on our website, you will see that the present configuration of our board is that we have our president, Eugene Jennings. He will step up in a moment. I'm a vice president, and Jan Kind, I think well known in your organization, is also a vice president. And in that time, a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2013, I started work with Jan Kind. He's a Dutch guy, so the communication is a little bit easier. But Jan has a very, how do you say that, he's a good networking guy. And he knows my Skype, and he knows my daily habits, so he's always able to break in when I'm just working behind my desk for 5 or 10 minutes and say, have you think about this, and what should we do with that? And then we have to find Gene, and Gene is much more occupied, and he's not yet retired, and we hope that he will retire soon, because his profession is demanding quite a lot of his time, too much, I think, yeah. And Gene is always a little bit harder to get online. But, okay. So, we work with that. In that organization, I think on the moment we have something like 130 members, but that is not the importance. We organize conferences. And the next conference will be in Santa Barbara, California. Very close to Crotona. There's only, a half-hour drive. It is not a distance, but you have to go through the mountain. Lovely way to go from Crotona to Santa Barbara. Nice to do. And we have a team, and it is just in the air, you can say, Theosophy and Social Responsibilities, applying the head and the heart teachings of H.P.B. Blavatsky. And there we have to put a challenge on ourselves to say, if we study the secret doctrine, with all the difficulties and the technical sides in it, we should be able to transform that to something what is really relating to social life and to solve social problems. And another thing what we like to do the first day is that we study the secret doctrine from all the different traditions, that people are able to mention all the sources, and that we really have a very nice conference, a very good exchange with each other to make a little bit step up in understanding each other and have a better cross-pollination. The purpose of ITC is really, how you can say, cooked in 2014. And that was, we were first coming up with a Niden declaration. And I still remember that Saturday evening, and I look where he's sitting, Marcus. Marcus was there as well. Yeah. And we had a very intense conversation with each other. Which words to be used, and what is the implementation of it, and what is the understanding of it, and so. It was a real, how do you can say, hot evening, but impersonal. Impersonal. So what it was, on the end of the evening, we had a nice Niden declaration, but you have to work quite hard for it. But it was a lot of fun, I can really tell you. Yeah. So from there, I think we distillated the principle of the purposes, and you can see that we are put a number of, you can say, challenging on ourselves. That is the maintaining the principles, to have intercommunication and understanding and respect for each other. So the remark from, oh, that is not from my tradition, I don't like it. No. If we have trust, if we have respect, at least we should try to understand what is going on and what it means. And this is an important thing. We don't like to be another theosophical society, and that is very important. People mix that quite often, yeah? Because we think there are enough theosophical societies. Maybe there are already too many. So we like to be in platform, a neutral platform, where all the existing organizations are feeling at home, willing to come, to exchange, to cross-pollinate, to unite people in sharing the philosophy. So, and you see, one of the key elements from the Niden Declaration are, we commit ourselves to learning, training, cross-pollination, to popularize and keep the teaching alive for further generations. So, I think this is what I like to say to you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Got it? Okay. I'd like to thank Herman for that presentation, compassion, and also an introduction to some of the broader sorts of theosophical works that are going on around the world today. Right now, I'm going to be introducing Eugene Jennings, Dr. Eugene Jennings, who is also a member of one of our sister organizations within the theosophical movement, the United Lodge of Theosophists, ULT. He's been a member also for quite some time, and he speaks internationally on various theosophical topics. Again, Gene I first met at that same conference in 2011. Gene is a doctor who practices as a psychiatrist and also in the field of neurology. But I met Gene at that time, and I'm very happy to be able to present him here today. He's a very dynamic and very creative speaker and thinker. So I think his views on theosophical matters will be something that will certainly spark your interest and give you something to think about when you walk out the door. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Eugene Jennings.
You know,
also, I should say, he's president of the...
I have to tell you a short story in the meantime. Oh, this there. Well, anyhow, I will tell you. In 2008, I was coming in Hellevoort, and then there was stepping in a guy out of the audience to give him presentation. And that was Gene. And then he was not able to get his computer working, and he was trying to give his presentation and work in the meantime on his computer. And to be honest with you, what he was saying was making not too much sense to me. Then I think, now this is impossible. So I step up, I put him aside, press him a little bit to the left, started working on his computer, starting up to the computer, etc. So, you know, that karmic situation is still, how you say that, still active nowadays.
Yeah, and it's still not working. Still not working. It's a karmic thing. You want to do that again? Thank you.
First, as usual, let me just extend a great
great thanks to our teachers and to the community to which they belong, for without their sharing of knowledge, we wouldn't be here today. Two talis.
We are good friends, but he is never willing to give his passwords.
Secondly then, on behalf of members of ITC as well as members of ULT that I've been very close with in regards to this effort, we would like to extend a warm welcome to International President Tim Boyd and to Vice President Satapati. And, yes, my vision is, and actually to all of you, as well as all of you online. When I was invited to speak, I was on vacation. And so there was not much technological communication that could be done, but I did receive an email about 2 weeks in, and that was, "We need a title for your talk." And so the overall theme was compassion and responsibility, and so I sat down, put together a title, sent it in, and I got a nice reply. Do you remember the reply? The title is nice, but it's very long, and to be honest, there are many people talking on compassion and responsibility as that goes in the title. So, whatever happens from this point on is not my fault. The title, is it? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Herman. The title that I had chosen in that moment then was Karma, Reincarnation, and Buddhi-Manas. Words that I am sure everyone here is familiar with. And then I was charged with the task in my own mind, because there are several of them, as you've heard from some of the talks, to figure out how that related to compassion and responsibility. Karma as an idea seems somewhat harsh, and yet Madame Blavatsky tells us that karma is the law of nurturing. So how to put those two things together? We speak of karma, we say it's good, we say it's bad. It's doing this to us. Yes, we sent it out, but we don't want to take it back. That, when it comes back, is not always perceived as nice, perceived as right, or even perceived as just, because the personality that's experiencing it is not the personality that initiated it often. And so why should we even believe this? Problem. So I went to work looking in the teachings, and I came up with a definition that Madame Blavatsky gives us in the Key to Theosophy in regards to karma. And she says it is the universal absolute law. Interesting, because we often say that compassion is the law of laws. Without a doubt, she said, universal absolute law. And then she goes on to say that every other law arises from that law. And that law of absoluteness is coeval with deity. Now, compassion is not in that sentence. And so it makes us wonder what's going on. And yet again, we have to acknowledge that karma is deity. So, let's read something. It's a little long, but I think it's very valuable because, again, it comes from the Secret Doctrine, and it supports everything that has been said over the last several days in regards to compassion, as well as the process, as well as the neurophysiology, as well as the chaos that we see in the world every day. Madame Blavatsky is speaking about the divine world in this portion of the SD, and she then segues. She says, in the mysterious language of the old stanza, in the catechism, the master is made to ask the pupil, and you probably remember this, lift thy head, O Lanu. Dost thou see one or countless lights above thee, burning in the dark midnight sky? I sense one flame, O Guru Deva. I see countless undetached sparks shining in it. Thou sayest well, and now look around and into thyself. That light which burns inside thee, dost thou feel it different in any wise from the light that shines in thy brother men? Interesting. Do we feel it to be different? Lanu says, it is in no way different, though the prisoner is held in bondage by karma, and though its outer garments delude the ignorant into saying, thy soul and my soul. And therein lies the gist of everything that has been said in this conference. The why, as well as the answer in regards to how to reverse that process. And for this student, I often think of the sun in light of this. And I try often when I look out to say, if there is one sun and there are billions of rays, and those rays just happen to be wrapped in different reflections of the ray's own energy, am I any different than anything here, than anyone here? And the answer has to be no. We've heard about the one life. We've heard about the concept of emptiness. We search to experience an unveiled deity, whether without or whether within. And somehow we can talk about it, but we don't often feel it. And that was the key word. Not in the head, but in the heart. Do we know it to be true? And the one thing that stops us from that realization that would probably stop all of the violence, stop all of the brutality, because if for one moment the cataracts could drop from our eyes and we could see the light in every atom as expressed in the morning prayer, in every atom, in every form, and then we could see that larger light that organizes those little atoms around it. And then we looked within and we saw that the light was the same. The question that we would have to ask ourselves is, why am I killing myself? Why am I hurting myself? Why am I in conflict with myself? And the interesting thing about this is that every night we have a great opportunity to realize this. Because when we go to sleep, somehow or another, out of nothing, we create a universe that we call dream. And in that universe of dream, we clothe it with the karmic garments of our own imagination. And then the most insane part of this is that we take that universal consciousness of our mind that created the landscape, the animals, the good ones that we call good, the bad ones that we call bad, and we put it in one object that we identify with. And then we say, everyone else is different. Everything else is different. And the person that's chasing us really is ourselves, but we call it enemy. The animal that wants to destroy us, we think of it as different and we want to kill it. We cannot get rid of the illusion that there is only one consciousness, there is only one life, there is only one motion, there is only one truth. And yet sometimes we can wake ourselves up inside that dream and we can realize, and it's amazing, that we are watching the dream, that we've created the dream, that we are everything in the dream, and that it's a dream, and that we're not the dream. And then we ask ourselves, what do we want to do with that? And we say, well, now I've got to get everyone else in the dream to wake up to the fact that there's only one consciousness in the dream. But since we haven't gotten to that stage, our teachings tell us that if we can understand karma, and I believe this was to paraphrase one of the words of the teachers, if we can understand karma and the way that it works and what it is, and the fact that, as Madame Blavatsky says, it is the most nurturing, it compensates the most, it gives us the most peace, and that it is no different than our essential nature. If we can understand this, then we in fact are workers for change in the world, because then the next step is helping others realize through the feeling that the lights are no different, that we are all the same, and that we're hurting ourselves. And I believe that was what J.C. said when he said, "You that hurt the least of them hurt me also," to paraphrase that. Now, before we talk about just some of the things in this slide, because obviously there are several books here that we could talk about, and as is my nature, I tend to go on and on and on, and then I have good friends who remind me of this thing called time. So, before we jump into this, let me just state that we talk about the universal one life, we talk about the absolute, and yet we can never conceptualize the absolute, although the experiential piece of that is possible. And Madame Blavatsky then speaks about two ones in the secret doctrine. Then the second one we can simply describe as that universal monad that is responsible for the birth of every other monad on any other level of the universe, and the force that is inherent within it. That force translates to karma. And if we understand ourselves as that spark, as that nature, then we understand that in one respect we are the three fundamentals. We live in the ocean of deity as the primary expression of deity that is our absolute nature. as law is one with deity, that law expresses itself as a dynamic force in terms of cycles and periodicity and what we call karma. And it does so through generating forms that the light, in its human sense, mistakes for itself, which is the primary ground that we call ignorance. Ignorance of what we are that is not limited. But she speaks about that monad, and if we see ourselves as that monad, perhaps smaller in scale, not as great in circumference in regards to the field of influence that we exist in, but nonetheless the same as, then we can begin to understand, as she has given us, different aspects of that one life, that absolute law that is compassion. There is no doubt that it is responsibility. And she tells us then that the very nature of our being is harmony. It is when we disturb that harmony that this thing called karma, another concept which reflects the dynamic process inherent within our being, begins to correct itself. But it does so not simply tit for tat, cause and effect. It does so, she says, in a harmonizing, equilibrating, and enlightening manner, so that karma then becomes the very force of evolution and the very force of the awakening of our consciousness to a greater circumference of life. Now, this is also important when we begin to look at aspects, range. We talk about karma, again, cause and effect, moral ethics, ethical causation, retribution, what comes around goes around, sowing and reaping. And we mistakenly, and you can crucify me for this because even in the books they say it, good and bad, we mistakenly call it good and bad. But she tells us that karma is impersonal, hence it knows no good or bad. And the good and bad are simply from the perspective of the I, who simply wants to deal with something at a certain time or doesn't, which is not reality and really irrelevant. But when we think about karma in terms of broadening our understanding and what even we might give to the world, we have to think about the range of its effect. And so she tells us that karma is there in the ever-existent state and stage of being. It is there in the pre-existent. It is there in the process of Genesis. It is there in the manifestation of cosmos. It is there in the formation of what we would call end universes or multi-universes. Because again, we're only talking about one great organism in space. Clusters of galaxies, it is there. Galaxies, it is operating. It operates in solar systems. It operates in the nebula that give rise to this particular solar system. It's operating within the sun and its siblings, the planets, and everything in this small solar system. It operates on the globe, in the formation of the continents, the manifestation of the elements themselves, the manipulation of the atoms themselves, the formation of the kingdoms on the earth. None of this is accidental. None of this is, as Darwin has been interpreted, a struggle for the fittest, but it is an unfolding of a plan, if we can use that term, that has its reflection in what is called the paradigmatic image of the universe, or that thought that is held in the divine mind of the universe. And we had a little taste of that on a physical level regarding neurophysiology when our doctor was telling us that the whole universe, in essence, is pictured within the brain. And we can understand that from the point of view of the monad, because if the universal monad is the image of that entire universe and the entire possibilities for the complete duration of that Mahamanvantara, then, as Madame Blavatsky tells us in a footnote, it is stepped down, and yet the monad is the monad, and hence it is inherent within our very being, and that is the plan that karma is constantly working to come to a sense of harmony with, whether we know it or not. And what we know and compared to just the range that we were looking at is very, very small. And so we should not judge with our smallness something that is so great. But to go on, then, karma obviously impacts the root races, it impacts the racial relations, it impacts the way the kingdoms are interacting with us, it impacts the national aspect. And one word that fits all of these different ways that karma is acting is distributive. And she speaks about distributive karma, as well as what appears to be individual karma. And that distributive karma is a universal process. We limit it when we think about distributive karma from the point of view of just the human race. No. It is much, much, much more. So that first bubble is a book about the range of karma. And if for each level of that we could explore karma, we would not be the same just after that little exercise if we could embrace that. The second concept that goes along, what are the types of karma? And in ULT, Mr. Judge has a little pamphlet on karma. But again, so much has been said in the Mahatma letters on karma, so much in the secret doctrine, that we know that karma is hidden and manifest. The hidden part of that is what is hidden within the very fabric of our minds as triadic beings, Atma Buddhi-Manas, which you've heard about. And that level of manasic light that holds the impressions of a collective manvantaric lifetime that need to be harmonized, as well as those that are affiliated with the individual incarnating into space-time dimension, what we call life. There is the karma that we are making as we speak, as we live. There is the karma that we are experiencing as we are making more karma. And we are told there is the karma that is stored. And again, that storage in the Hindu tradition, excuse me for butchering the words, I believe is called karmashaya. In the Buddhist tradition, at least in the Yogacara school, they refer to the alaya vijnana. Judge speaks about it as the realm of karmic seeds. And Madame Blavatsky speaks about it as the memory of the reincarnating ego. All the same. So, each of those we can then look at in even more detail in regards to what they are, what role they play. Function. What is the function of karma? What functions does karma engage itself in? Functions of birth, determining species that we are born into, determining lifespan, determining quality of life, determining racial placement, determining sensory capacities of sensitivity that allow us to see beyond or become so contracted. As the teachers tell us, the skandhas are the limiting factors of our being, which translates into they lock us out from the universality that we are. And when we misidentify with the skandhas, then we've missed the realization and the recognition, both within and without, of what life is really all about, which necessitates compassion, which demands responsibility. We can go on and on with the different functions because they also have to do with how we meditate, the stages of absorption that we reach in meditation, the planes that they allow us to have peaks into. Because when we're understanding the rounds and races and we recognize that we are only in the 4th round, the enlightenment that we experience now is not the enlightenment that we will experience in the 7th round. Even Buddha was considered to be a 6th rounder, so far in advance of what we typically engage with as it relates to the understanding of reality and consciousness. And yet there's more. And there's a reason for that if we understand the rhythmic process of breathing of the monad itself. But moving on because of time, there are the processes. The processes of karma have to do with how impressions, which are not images of 3-dimensional space-time, because as we heard, neurophysiologically, we're talking about signals, perhaps a Morse code, that then become translated in time and space in regards to our sensory apparatus in a different way, such that we perceive, based on our limited 5 senses, this perception that we mistake for reality. And yet, when the body is given up and we are here in a present life, there will be different impressions. But the signal process that translates those impressions may not necessarily change. And so the process has to do with how the signals are laid down in the fabric of the mind so that they become stored. Process relates to how those signals in that matrix of mind, which is beyond the mind of the individual being. Nice tune, nice tune. Beyond the mind of the individual being, still is able to join, and you have to think of this in a very dynamic way. I mean, everyone has seen a pot of water boil. The mental deposits, the karmic impressions, the skandhas, whatever you'd like to call them, are not static. It is not a, I wrote it down, there it is, next line. It is a constant process of seething and mixing and dynamic interactions and transformations. And if we could see that, it would be a process of beauty. And then we would look at how that process precipitates out, just like rain drops down from a cloud and drops perhaps on dry land or into the ocean. And then we would begin to see the whole process of precipitation, evaporation, condensation, accumulation, precipitation, i.e., as it relates to the karmic process. We would then begin to understand how the karmic process itself truly impacts the very atoms of our being. We are biased. We think that the atoms are the foundation of our being and our universe. We think that the particles, the quirks, and all of that, etc. are. We've come across this thing that we call conceptually the Higgs particle, the Higgs force, and we say, wow, now we understand what converts the formless into form. And again, It was all there in the secret doctrine. And Madam, in one sweet sentence, says, Fohat hardens the atoms. One sentence. And now we have to spend years understanding how Higgs hardens matter, or gives matter that is invisible mass such that it can interact with its altered forces to create forms that we then use. But we should not mistake the nature that we are is before the process of hardening. It is before the process of the manifestations of the galaxies, the solar systems, and all of that. And as challenging as it may be to the minds that are typically concerned with what we do every day, this is part of karma. Even the way the atoms are hardened, which we then use to clothe our very being, such that it should result in disease or harmony or extrasensory abilities, is understood from a karmic process, because that is law. We can understand karma from the point of view of the physics and the dynamics. In other words, what are the forces that are moving these processes? How fast, how dynamic, how sluggish? What is the pulsatory motion that turns into vortical motion that results in manifestation? Those are the words that she uses in the secret doctrine. From the absolute to the manifest, the pulsatory changes to the vortical. The vortical, and again, this is very much the modern physics that we're familiar with now. Only we've used different words and different things. How much? Oh, my Lord. Okay, so let's just give you a fast tour. That would have been the next one. Which, oh, here am I. Because again, there's just more. There's just too much to understand about karma. But the one thing that we can understand is that it comes down to when we are incarnate, the idea of I. And so since you've heard a lot of about meditation, I won't bore you with that process, other to say that meditation should be 24/7. And that the biggest part of that is untying the knot of I. Because as we understand, when that which is universal takes on the sense of I, and Madame Blavatsky is very clear on this, the sense of I. Not the reality of I, the sense of I. And we get lost in that sense and we misidentify with that sense. Then it becomes an issue of I am this, not that. I like this, I don't like that. And this is mine, not yours. And as a result of that, it is inevitable that we have conflict. It is inevitable that we have points of view. It is inevitable that we, because of our differences in development, see things differently. So one of the main parts of any kind of meditational process is how do we untie the knot of I? How do we get rid of the condensation that we call personality and see beyond that? And so shooting to the chase, I will just say that there are many texts. You've heard about some of the Mahayanas. Madame Blavatsky says the Mahayana tradition, the Yogacara tradition, and Patanjali, or Sankhya, has the answers. And if you go into these traditions, you will find various methods of practice that have to do with changing the entire way we view life and each other. And as Vic said yesterday, the awareness disidentifies with the experience. We then come to understand everything as content in the field of our awareness. But even awareness indicates dichotomy. And the question then is, how do we get rid of the because that implies other. And so, from that perspective, we even move deeper into a conscious, everyday realization of our nature, not necessarily sitting down in the quiet, but an experiential reality of that here and now in every moment. And it becomes a balancing act to know reality and yet live in time and space in regards to compassion and responsibility. Because in some sense, and I'll wrap it up on this note, the challenge would be, can you in true honesty, if you strip yourself down to the bare I-ness of your being, which is not the deepest level of your being, but it's right there in the middle. If you can do that, can that I-ness truly say it is any different than the I-ness in the person sitting next to you? There is no qualification of the I-ness. And that is still a very external aspect of our true internal being. And so if we can even reach that stage, compassion becomes a blessing and a curse, because when we feel, as indicated in the opening, when we feel the light in another, and we feel what is around that light, it is not always pleasant. It is not always happy. It is about suffering. It is about pain. It is about sorrow. And that can be overwhelming, especially if we're feeling it all the time. And yet the task that our teachers have given us is, while we study their teaching, while we practice their life, live the life to know the teaching, our obligation is to work, no matter what we feel. And so, if we can understand these ideas, which I think I got through 3 of maybe 15, so sorry, and practice this, not as a practice, but as a living of life, we will find veils simply dissolving, and we will be in great communication with ourselves, because there is no other self. And if we cannot be compassionate to our greater self, then we've lost ourselves in that heresy of separateness, which is simply one of the skandhas that has got to go by the wayside. So, on that note, I will say thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Jennings. I told you it would be thought-provoking, so you have a little bit of time to think about these things. I'd like to thank both of our speakers for coming a very long distance to share with us.